At this point, you should have a bunch of empty screens in your project. To move around them, you'll need to think about routing, and Flutter gives you two different options for doing so, Navigator 1.0 and Navigator 2.0. In this course, we'll be using Router 1.0. It takes an imperative approach where you push and pop screens on a stack. This is the traditional way that navigation is handled when building a native mobile app. However, Flutter recently introduced Navigator 2.0 that takes a more declarative approach where your actual routing changes are determined based on the state of your application. You might think that Navigator 2.0 is the newer, better approach, but it's really just a different approach. And to be perfectly honest, it hasn't been very well received in the Flutter community in general. You really have to think carefully about how you architect your app in order to use it effectively. For most applications, I think Navigator 1.0 is perfectly suitable, and that's what we'll use to get the job done here. I like to think of routing as a global concern, so I'm going to create a file here called routes.dart. Then at the top of that file, I'm importing every single screen that we created in the previous video, with the exception of the quiz screen. From there, I'm creating a map named app routes that will map a string value to the actual widget that we want to display there. The key for the route starts with a slash, except for the root route, which is just a slash by itself. The value is an anonymous function that has access to the build context and returns a widget. That's the widget that will be pushed onto the stack when you navigate to this route. We'll want to define a named route like this for each one of our screens, like login, topics, profile, and about. The only one that we don't need is quiz. That route requires an ID from our database, which we don't have yet, and we'll learn how to route to it later in the course. Now that we have this routes object, we need to register it with the application, and for that, we'll go into our main Dart file. The material app takes a routes parameter, and we'll pass it the app routes we just defined as the argument. Make sure to import the routes at the top, or if you start typing app routes, then hit tab, it should auto import for you. That takes care of the routing configuration. Now the question becomes, how do we navigate from one screen to another? To demonstrate this, let's go into one of our pages, like the home page, and create a button that will navigate to another page. I'm starting with a scaffold at the root, then centering an elevated button in the middle. The important part of this code is the onPressed event handler. It will call the navigator class, which contains a bunch of different methods to manage routing and navigation in the app. The most fundamental methods are push and pop. Push will add a new screen to the top of the UI, then pop will navigate backwards in the history by removing that screen from the top. In our case, we want to go from the home page to the about page, and we're dealing with named routes here, so we use the push named method. It takes the context as its first argument and the name of the route as the second argument. That'll take us to the about page, so let's go ahead and add some UI to it. I'm adding a scaffold at the root, and then I'm adding a basic app bar to that scaffold. The app bar has a built-in back button, so when you navigate to it, it will automatically show a back arrow, making it really easy to handle backwards navigation. At this point, you'll want to do a full restart on the application by entering a capital R into the terminal, and when it reloads, you should see a button in the middle of the home screen. When you tap it, that will take you to the About screen, which you'll notice has a back button up here at the top of the scaffold, and when tapped, it takes you back to the home screen. And that's how you perform basic navigation with named routes in Flutter.